My parents took my $50,000 medical school fund to pay for my sister's destination wedding. Mom said, "You're smart, you'll figure it out. She needs her big day." I worked 3 jobs and cut them off for 8 years. Yesterday, Dad was rushed to the hospital and needed the best surgeon in the state. I walked into the room in my white coat. "I figured it out, Mom, but as for Dad, he's not my patient." Mom fell to her knees. "My name is Layla Mercer. I am 33 years old. I am a cardiothoracic fellow at one of the top cardiac centers in the country. And last Tuesday, I walked into a hospital corridor in my white coat and looked my mother in the eye for the first time in 8 years. She was on her knees before I finished my second sentence. But I am not going to start this story there. I am not going to start it in the corridor, with the white coat, or with the words that brought my mother to the floor of a hospital hallway in Cleveland, Ohio. I am going to start it 11 years earlier, at a kitchen table in Cincinnati, on an afternoon in August when my entire future was quietly, calmly, and without my permission redirected into someone else's wedding budget, because that is the only way any of this makes sense. The corridor only means what it means if you understand what came before it. And what came before it is a story about money. Yes, about $50,000 that took 18 years to build and 11 minutes to take. But more than that, it is a story about what happens when the people who love you most decide that love is enough of a reason to stop protecting you. It is a story about what you do when you are 22 years old, standing in the ruins of a plan you built your entire childhood toward, and the person who took it from you looks you in the eye and says, with full sincerity, that she believes in you. It is a story about 8 years, about 3 jobs, about an alarm going off at 4:45 in the morning on days when getting up felt like the hardest thing in the world, and getting up anyway, because the alternative was letting the thing they did define the rest of your life, and you had already decided quietly, privately, without anyone to witness the decision that you were not going to let that happen. And yes, it is also a story about a corridor, and a white coat, and a mother on her knees. But we are going to earn that moment together. We are going to walk through every year that made it inevitable. And by the time we get there, I think you will understand why I said what I said, and why I do not regret a single word of it. If this already sounds familiar, if you are the person in your family who is always told you will figure it out, hit subscribe before we go any further. Not for me. For every person who has had to build alone because the people who should have helped them decided they could handle the loss. I read every comment. Okay, let me take you to Cincinnati. I want to spend some time on the money. Not the amount, though the amount matters, but what it was made of. Because when people hear $50,000, they tend to imagine something abstract. A number on a statement. A fund set up by people who had surplus to spare. That is not what this was. My father, Raymond Mercer, has worked with his hands his entire life. HVAC technician, 31 years with the same company. The kind of man who knows the sound of a failing compressor the way a musician knows an off note immediately, instinctively, from experience accumulated over decades. He smelled like machine oil and copper pipe. He wore the same brand of work boot for 22 consecutive years and replaced them only when the sole separated from the upper. He was not a man who wasted anything. My mother, Sandra, did bookkeeping part-time from a desk in the corner of the living room. The kind of arrangement that happens when you do the math on childcare and realize that working outside the home costs more than it earns. So you find a way to contribute around the edges of everything else. She was precise, organized, and the person in our household who remembered every due date, every appointment, every form that needed to be filled out and mailed back within 10 business days. We were not a poor family. I want to be accurate about that. We were not struggling in the way that makes the news. We were the kind of family where money was always the subtext, where every conversation about what we wanted was quietly, automatically filtered through what we could actually afford. A broken water heater was a genuine crisis that required redistribution of the month's budget. A vacation meant a long weekend somewhere within driving distance. College was not a given. It was a plan, and plans required resources, and resources required sacrifice over time. The $50,000 education fund was not built quickly. It was built the way you build anything when you do not have excess, slowly, deliberately, with a kind of discipline that most people who have not lived without a safety net do not fully understand. It was built across 18 years. I want to tell you exactly what it was made of, because this matters more than the number. $12,000 came from my grandfather, Earl Mercer. He died when I was 14 years old. He had emphysema for 3 years before the end. And in those 3 years, he put his affairs in meticulous order, the way a man does when he knows the timeline and wants to make sure nothing is left uncertain. In his will, handwritten, witnessed by 2 neighbors, notarized at the county clerk's office on a Thursday afternoon in October, he left a specific instruction. The instruction was for me. I still know every word of it by heart, for my Layla bird, so she can become the doctor this family never had. He had watched me read medical textbooks I borrowed from the school library since I was 9 years old. He had sat next to me at his kitchen table on Sunday afternoons and asked me what I was learning. He had listened to explanations of cardiac anatomy from a 10-year-old with the patient attention of a man who understood that what he was witnessing was real and specific and worth taking seriously. He believed in something he never got to see arrive, and he made sure, the only way available to him, that his faith had a dollar amount attached to it, so that when he was gone, the belief he had in me would continue to do something practical in the world. $18,000 came from 18 years of ritual birthdays, Christmases, report card envelopes, the small ceremonies a family performs around a child they are quietly, consistently proud of, a $5 bill tucked into a birthday card from an uncle who worked at a gas station, a 20 at graduation from a neighbor who had watched me grow up, $100 from a distant aunt in Akron who heard through a cousin that I wanted to become a doctor and mailed a check with a note that said simply, "Start saving." Those dollars came from people who did not have much to give and gave anyway, because they had decided, each of them independently, that I was worth betting on. $11,000 came from my father's overtime. 3 consecutive winters, I was 15, 16, 17. He took every extra shift that became available. He came home after dark. I would hear the truck in the driveway after 9 o'clock and see the kitchen light come on and know he was in there eating cold leftovers from the refrigerator because dinner had long since been put away. His hands were split from the cold in the work. He never mentioned the extra shifts in connection with my future. He never made a speech. He never asked for acknowledgement. I found out when I was 17, when I overheard my parents talking after they thought I was asleep, and my father said something about the fund being almost where it needed to be for Layla's first year. I sat in the hallway outside their door, and I pressed my back against the wall, and I understood, for the first time, what sacrifice looks like when it is done without an audience. $9,000 came from a check with my name on it. I was 16. A car ran a red light and struck the vehicle I was riding in. I had a mild concussion and a bruised shoulder. The other driver's insurance company settled out of court. The check was made out to me. My parents sat with me at the kitchen table and asked what I wanted to do with it. I said, "Put it in the fund." My name was on that money. I handed it over without hesitation, because at 16 years old, I understood that my future was the thing most worth investing in, and I trusted the people at that table to hold it for me. That is the $50,000. Not a windfall, not a trust fund. 18 years of discipline, grief, overtime, and the small ceremonies of love that working families perform when they cannot give you everything except the most important thing, the evidence that they believe you are worth sacrificing for. My grandfather kept the original of his note in a fireproof box in his bedroom closet. I kept a photocopy in the back of a notebook I carried everywhere. The night after the kitchen conversation, I found it. I sat on the edge of my bed and I read it 4 times. For my Layla bird, so she can become the doctor this family never had. Then I packed a bag. It was August. I was 22 years old. I had received my acceptance letter to the MD program at Ohio State College of Medicine 6 weeks earlier, and I had read it standing at the kitchen counter and then sat down on the floor because my legs stopped working the way legs do when something you have wanted for your entire conscious life finally becomes real. I had been accepted. I was going to medical school. 3 weeks from the start of orientation, I was already making lists, textbooks, apartment logistics, the schedule of my last shifts at the hospital receptionist job I had been working all summer. My sister Amber was 26. She was 4 years older than me and had always operated in a different orbit, louder, more social, more comfortable, at the center of a room. She had gotten engaged 9 months earlier to a man named Chris Holloway, who was kind enough and worked in insurance sales. The wedding they were planning was in Tulum, Mexico. 5 days, 80 guests, a private villa with an ocean view, an open bar that ran from noon until midnight, a wedding photographer flown in from New York who had a portfolio full of couples standing on white sand beaches with the light hitting them just right. I had seen the mood board on Amber's laptop screen during a Sunday dinner. I had heard the conversations about venue deposits and catering quotes and the cost of flying 80 people to the Yucatan Peninsula. I had not understood that any of those conversations involved my money. I was in the kitchen making a grocery list, a real one, the kind with categories, because I was already thinking in systems, already organizing the logistics of what the next 3 weeks needed to look like when my mother came and sat down at the table across from me. She had a particular way of beginning difficult conversations. I did not recognize it for what it was until much later, when I had enough distance to see the pattern clearly. She always led with a compliment. Something specific, something warm, something that was genuinely true about you. The compliment landed first and opened you up, and then whatever came next arrived into the space it had created. "You're so capable, Layla," she said. "You always figure things out. You always land on your feet. You're the kind of person who can handle anything." She paused. "I've always admired that about you. You're stronger than you know." I looked up from my grocery list. "We need to talk about the education fund," she said. Her voice had shifted slightly. It was the same word she would use to discuss any logistical matter, calm and practical, the tone of a woman who had organized her thoughts before arriving. "There have been we've had to make some adjustments. Amber's venue deposit came due in June, and the costs involved in the wedding they've been more than we anticipated, and the timing of everything just..." "How much?" I said. I put my pen down. She looked at her hands, folded on the table. "How much, Mom?" "Most of it." She said it without looking up. I sat very still. The refrigerator ran. Through the window above the sink, the neighbor's lawnmower started up the old gas-powered one that always needed 3 pulls. Somewhere down the block, a car door closed. The world continued in its ordinary, oblivious way. "How much is most?" I said. My voice was completely level. I did not recognize it as coming from me. $47,000. She delivered the number in one breath, the way you say something you have been rehearsing for days. "We kept $3,000 for you, for your first month. For books we didn't leave you with nothing, Layla. We made sure there was something to help you get started." $47,000. My grandfather's $12,000. My father's 3 winters of overtime. My 16-year-old self handing over an insurance check. 18 years of birthday envelopes and Christmas cards, and a distant aunt in Akron who mailed $100 because she believed in me. All of it. Redirected. Already spent. Already turned into an ocean view villa in Mexico and a New York photographer and an open bar that ran until midnight. "Amber needs this," my mother said. Her voice had moved into explanation mode now. The measured, reasonable tone of someone who has already worked through the logic and arrived at peace with the conclusion. "She has waited for this her whole life. This wedding means everything to her, Layla. You know how much this year has taken out of her. All the planning, all the stress. She deserves her moment. She deserves her big day." A pause. "And you are going to be fine. You are so smart. You will figure it out. You always do." There it was. There was the compliment again. I sat with it for a moment and let myself understand for the first time what it actually meant when it was used this way. That my capability was the permission she had given herself to take from me. That my strength was the excuse that made the taking feel acceptable. You will be fine. You will figure it out. You always do. Translation. We needed it more than you needed it. And we knew you could survive the loss. And that was enough of a reason. I stood up. I picked up my grocery list from the table. I folded it in half and put it in my back pocket. "Tell Amber congratulations," I said. I walked to my room. I closed the door behind me. I did not slam it. I did not raise my voice. I sat down on the floor with my back against the bed, and I stayed there for 4 hours while the sun went down and the light in the room changed from afternoon yellow to the flat gray of early evening. I did not cry. I was not going to cry in that house, in that room, for a situation that was not my failure but theirs. I was going to sit with it until it became something I could use. By the time I heard the television come on in the living room at 8 o'clock, the ordinary sound of an ordinary evening, as though nothing had happened, as though the entire architecture of my future had not just been quietly dismantled over what I imagined had been a polite conversation. I had made a decision, not a dramatic one, not a declaration. A quiet, specific, private choice that settled into the center of me the way a foundation settles into soil, permanent, load-bearing, invisible to anyone who does not know what to look for. I was going to become a doctor. I was going to do it without this family's money, without their help, without asking for an apology, acknowledgement, or support of any kind. I was going to disappear from their version of this story, and I was going to write my own, alone, from the ground up, using nothing except the capability my mother had just used as a reason to take from me. My father never came to check on me. Not that evening, not the next morning before I left. He sat in the living room, and he watched television, and he let the night pass in silence. That is the detail I have carried longest. Not the number, not the conversation. Just the silence on the other side of my door, and a man who drove to job sites in the dark for 3 winters so I could go to medical school, sitting quietly in the next room while his daughter sat on the floor and rebuilt her entire life without him. I have thought many times about why my mother made the decision the way she did. Not the decision itself, which was clear and deliberate, but the mechanism of it, the way she arrived at it. The way she sat across from me with her hands folded and her voice steady and delivered the information the way you deliver a budget update, as though reallocating money that belonged to me was a logistical adjustment rather than a violation. I think she genuinely believed that I would be fine. I think she looked at everything I had demonstrated about my own capability, and she concluded that the risk of taking from me was low. She was not wrong about my capability. She was catastrophically wrong about what the capability obligated her to do with the information. There is a particular kind of harm that comes from being the competent child. It is invisible because it does not look like neglect from the outside. From the outside, it looks like confidence, like a parent who trusts their child, who has faith in what their child can do, who chooses not to worry because worrying seems unnecessary given the evidence. But from the inside, from where I was sitting on that bedroom floor, it felt like being evaluated and found sufficient to bear a loss that should never have been assigned to me in the first place. I was 22 years old. I had done everything right. I had earned every dollar in that fund through years of being exactly the person they needed me to be. And the reward for being that person was that they decided I could survive without what the fund was supposed to give me. The capable child is the one who gets left to figure it out. That is not faith. That is a tax on excellence, and I was done paying it. Before I left the next morning, I took the photocopy of my grandfather's note from the notebook where I kept it. I left everything else. I sent my mother one text. "I'll figure it out. Don't contact me until I do." She responded within 3 minutes. "We love you, Layla. We know you'll be okay." I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my bag and walked out of the house and did not look back at it. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part they did not see: the 8 years of what figuring it out actually looks like when there is no safety net, no fallback, and no one calling to check on you. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I want to know. And if this is already hitting close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Okay, the real story starts here. People use the phrase, "she figured it out," the way they use phrases like, "she found a way," or "things worked out," as a kind of comfortable shorthand for a process they do not want to examine too closely, because examining it would require them to acknowledge what the figuring out actually costs. Let me be precise about what it cost. Year 1. I deferred my medical school enrollment by 12 months. I was not going to start a program of that magnitude without a financial foundation I understood and controlled down to the last dollar. I had $3,000 what remained of the fund. I had a studio apartment I found through a hospital bulletin board, shared with a nursing student named Priya Anand, who I did not know, and who turned out to be one of the most sensible, self-contained people I have ever lived alongside. We shared a kitchen and a bathroom and an unspoken agreement that neither of us would ask the other for more than the situation required. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. During the day, I worked the front desk of a hospital, not the one my family had once talked about in the abstract future tense, the one where someday Layla would be a doctor, a different hospital, a regional medical center on the east side of Columbus where I logged patients, filed insurance authorizations, answered phone calls, and watched the physicians and residents move through the corridors with the particular focus of people who have chosen lives structured around urgency. I stored what I observed the way you store fuel. I was going to need it. In the evenings, I drove for a rideshare company. I learned the geography of Columbus from the inside of my car at night, the neighborhoods that were busy on Thursdays, the streets that flooded in heavy rain, the hospital district that generated calls at shift change, the bar areas where the surge pricing ran until 2 in the morning. I learned to end a conversation with a passenger in 30 seconds without being rude. I learned that people will tell you almost anything if they are in the backseat of your car at 11 o'clock at night and they have decided you are safe. I kept the radio off and the windows up, and I ran anatomy flashcards through my head while I drove. On weekends, I worked at a medical supply warehouse, pulling inventory, scanning barcodes, loading boxes onto pallets for morning deliveries. The work was physical and repetitive in a way I came to genuinely appreciate, because it gave my hands something concrete to do while my mind organized biochemistry, physiology, the Krebs cycle, the names of cranial nerves in order. I was not wasting time. Every shift was double use. I applied for 43 scholarships that year. I wrote 43 essays. I sat at the desk in my apartment, the one I found on the curb outside a university housing building, and carried up 2 flights of stairs myself. And I wrote about who I was and what I intended to do and why I was worth investing in, and I mailed those essays into the void and waited. 3 scholarships came back, a total of $14,000 from people who had never met me, who read a page and a half about a woman building a life without a foundation and decided to bet on her. I have never forgotten that. Strangers with resources sometimes make the decision that family with resources did not. I took out the minimum federal loans available. I built a spreadsheet, the first of what became dozens over the years, that tracked the principal, the interest rate, the projected monthly payment at the end of residency, the total cost of the debt across its full repayment window. I was not going to be ambushed by numbers I had not studied in advance. I had already learned what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a financial surprise. I was not going to let it happen again. Medical school began the following September. I was 23 years old and I had rebuilt a viable starting position from $3,000 in 12 months. I want to say that plainly, not for pride, but because I think it is important to name what is actually being described when someone says, "She figured it out." She worked 100 hours a week for a year. She wrote 43 essays. She pulled inventory at a warehouse on Saturday mornings and drove strangers across Columbus on Tuesday nights and sat at a curbside desk and built a foundation from zero. That is what figuring it out looks like. Medical school was hard in ways I had expected, and hard in ways I had not. The academics were not the surprise. I had been preparing for this curriculum since I was 9 years old. The surprise was the texture of the loneliness. Medical school is a particular kind of isolating environment. Everyone around you is operating at the absolute edge of their capacity. There is very little bandwidth for anything that is not immediately in service of surviving the program. And the social landscape is shaped almost entirely by shared stress rather than genuine intimacy. Most of my classmates had parents who sent money when things got tight. Most of them had a home they could return to during school breaks. Most of them had someone who called on Sunday evenings just to ask how they were doing. I had one person, Devin Ashby, a quiet, exacting woman from Cleveland who had grown up in a version of circumstances similar enough to mine that she understood, without needing it explained, what it looked like when someone was here entirely on their own. She did not make it a topic. She just adjusted, the way perceptive people do, and gave me the kind of support that looks like practicality. Shared note cards, leftover containers of soup that appeared at my door before big exams. The specific and understated gift of simply being present without requiring me to perform gratitude for it. Devon was my entire support system for 4 years. She never made me feel like that was a burden, and I have never adequately thanked her for it. I want to spend a moment on Devon because I think she deserves it, and because I think the role she played in my life during those years illustrates something important about what it actually means to support someone. Devon did not have money to spare either. She was managing her own loans, her own budget, her own calculations. She did not bring me soup because she had abundance and wanted to share it. She brought it because she had noticed, with the quiet attention of someone who pays close attention to the people around her, that I was not eating enough in the weeks before major examinations, and she had decided to do something about it. That is it. That is the entire logic. She saw a problem she could partially address, and she addressed it, without announcing it or making it a moment or asking for gratitude. She just showed up at the door with the container, and put it in my hands, and left. That kind of support, understated, consistent, offered without ceremony, is rarer than most people realize. In those 4 years, Devon gave me more of it than my entire family had given me in the preceding decade. I ate 1 full meal a day through most of medical school. Sometimes 2. When my shift in the gross anatomy lab, I worked there for a small stipend. Preparing specimens and maintaining equipment happened to overlap with a meal break. I was not malnourished. I was managing resources with the precision of someone who cannot afford to be imprecise. I knew exactly how much food cost, exactly how far a dollar needed to go, exactly what the margin was between managing and not managing. My family attended 0 moments of those 4 years. I sent nothing for Christmas. My birthday passed in my 2nd year without a message. They had stopped reaching out around the 6th month of my silence, and I had made no move to restart the conversation. I received a birth announcement when Amber's first child was born. A boy, a hospital photo, a blue card. I looked at it for a long time and thought about my grandfather, who had loved this family without condition and left $12,000 and a handwritten note behind as evidence. Then I filed the card and went back to studying. My Step 1 boards came at the end of my 2nd year. I had told myself I would wait until I had slept and eaten before I looked at the score. I looked at it the moment the portal opened, standing in the bathroom of my apartment in my socks, 97th percentile. I called Devon. I said 1 sentence, "We're going to be okay." She cried. I did not. I had already placed all my tears on the other side of this in a bedroom in Cincinnati, on a floor, in the dark. Residency came after medical school. General surgery, Cleveland Clinic. I want to tell you what that match means, because it matters. Out of the thousands of medical school graduates who apply to surgical residency programs every cycle, a very small fraction match at a program of that caliber. It is one of the most competitive placements in American medicine. The dean of students at my medical school called me into his office to tell me personally. He said, "Dr. Mercer, this is extraordinary." He did not know the extraordinary part. The extraordinary part was not the placement. The extraordinary part was that I had arrived at this door having constructed every single step of the staircase myself, in a building where no one was holding the light for me. Residency meant 80-hour work weeks and $65,000 a year, which is a number that sounds like real money until you calculate Cleveland's cost of living. The monthly loan repayments I had organized on the spreadsheet, and the fact that you are functionally working 2 full-time jobs simultaneously in one of the most consequential professional environments that exists. I paid my loans on a schedule. I tracked every milestone. When I cleared the final balance, I was in the break room at 6 in the morning after a night shift, and I opened the banking app on my phone and I looked at the zero for a long time before I closed it and poured a cup of coffee. That is what the end of debt feels like when you built it alone. Very quiet and entirely yours. I named my dog Earl. He was 3 years old, a rescue from the county shelter Brown, with 1 ear that stood up and 1 that didn't, and the particular energy of an animal who has been uncertain about the world and is cautiously deciding to trust it. I brought him home on a Sunday and sat on the floor of my actual apartment. I had furniture by then, a real bed with a headboard, curtains I had chosen, A kitchen that I cooked in, and I thought about my grandfather, who had written a note and left $12,000 behind and never got to see where they went. Earl sat beside me and put his head in my lap. "We did it," I told him. "He would have loved you." My cardiothoracic fellowship came next. The day I confirmed my match, I was alone in a hospital break room at the end of a 12-hour shift. I sat in a plastic chair in the fluorescent light, and I cried for the first time since the kitchen. Not from sadness, from the specific, unfamiliar relief of arriving somewhere you built yourself, of understanding that the thing they took had not stopped you from getting here, that the loss had changed the route and cost you more than it should have and taken years off your margin, but it had not changed the destination. The destination was always going to be this. My grandfather knew it when he was dying and I was 14. He was right. There is something I want to add about those 8 years that does not fit neatly into a timeline, but that I think is the most important thing I can say about what living them actually required. Every single day of those 8 years, I had the option to call my mother. I had the option to reach out, to soften the boundary I had set, to accept the version of support she was willing to offer in place of the support she owed me. I knew they were there. I knew they had a phone. I knew that if I called at any point, someone would answer. I did not call. Not because I was punishing them, though I understand why someone looking at it from the outside might read it that way. Not because I was running a performance of independence designed to eventually deliver a lesson. I did not call because calling would have required me to be in a relationship with people who had not yet understood what they had done. And being in that relationship while it was unexamined would have cost me energy I did not have to spare. Every hour I spent driving at night, every essay I wrote at the curbside desk, every shift I pulled at the supply warehouse, those hours were full. There was nothing left over. And whatever was left over I needed for the studying, for the exams, for the incremental construction of a future that no one else was going to build for me. That is the real cost of what they did. Not just the money, though. The money was real, and the absence of it was real, and the debt I took on in its place was real. The cost was the attention, the mental and emotional bandwidth that, in a different version of this story, would have been available for the ordinary maintenance of family relationships, the phone calls, the visits, the holiday dinners, the small ongoing investment in the people who were supposed to be permanent. That bandwidth was entirely consumed by survival. They did not just take the fund, they took the margin that would have allowed me to stay connected to them while I built. I think about Devon sometimes, about the fact that she had so little and still gave so much, about the soup containers that appeared at my door before exams without me asking, about the note cards she made for both of us when she could have made them only for herself. Devon understood something that my family did not, that supporting someone is not a transaction with expected returns. It is not contingent on having the resources to spare, or the timing being convenient, or the recipient being grateful enough to make you feel the sacrifice was worth it. Supporting someone is what you do when you have decided they matter. She had decided. They had not. That distinction has shaped every relationship I have built since those years. I know how to spot the difference between someone who is genuinely present and someone who is present when it is easy. I know how to recognize the language of people who use your strength as a reason to stop protecting you. I know what it feels like to be in a room full of people who love you and still be completely alone. And I know, with the specific certainty of someone who has lived both sides of it, what it feels like to have one person show up consistently and without condition. That knowledge is the most useful thing those 8 years gave me. More useful than the fellowship. More useful than the properties. More useful than the zero balance on every debt I have ever carried. Because it means I know exactly what to build and what to walk away from, and I will never again confuse the two. My father collapsed on a Tuesday morning. He was 61 years old. He had been managing moderate hypertension for a number of years inconsistently, the way people manage things that are not yet causing them visible problems, which is to say, taking the medication when he remembered, skipping it when he felt fine, trusting the body he had worked hard with his whole life to continue doing what it had always done. He was on a job site in Dayton when his coworker found him on the ground next to a utility van. The coworker called 911 immediately. He was transported to the nearest regional hospital, stabilized, assessed, and then transferred because the nature of the blockage required a specialist, and the specialist was in Cleveland to the cardiac center where I work. I did not know any of this was happening. I was in the middle of a routine clinical handoff, the formal passing of patient information between shifts, a structured and specific process that I have participated in hundreds of times. When a nurse mentioned a transfer in passing, she was not speaking to me directly. She was updating a colleague about incoming cases. Transfer coming up to the cardiac floor. She said, Mercer family, wife and a daughter, apparently very upset in the family room. Dr. Okafor's case. I heard my name. Not my name. The name. Our name. I finished the handoff. I walked to the nearest workstation and I pulled the transfer chart. Raymond Allen Mercer, 61, Cincinnati, Ohio. Emergency contact, Sandra Mercer. Primary residence listed. I recognized the street before I finished reading the address. I stood at that workstation for approximately 45 seconds. I know because I was watching the time display on the screen in front of me, without quite seeing it, and I read the clinical details. Acute cardiac event. Significant left anterior descending artery occlusion. Requires catheterization. Stable but critical. I took the stairwell. I stood in it for 2 minutes. I want to tell you what was in my mind during those 2 minutes, because I think it is important, and because it is not what people assume. I was not thinking about the money. I was not running a script for the conversation, rehearsing lines, planning a moment. I was thinking about my patient specifically, that my father was not going to be my patient, and that Dr. Okafor, whose record in this department I know in detail, was going to care for him with the precision and skill that this situation required. I was thinking about the ethics policy that governs physician conduct in this hospital, and in hospitals everywhere. The rule that prevents doctors from treating immediate family members, a rule that exists for excellent reasons, and that I have always followed, and always will. I was thinking about the last 8 years and the fact that they were over now, one way or another. I straightened my coat. I checked that my badge was clearly visible against the lapel. I walked out of the stairwell and onto the cardiac floor. The waiting area was visible from the corridor, a row of padded institutional chairs, a television mounted too high on the wall, a window that looked out at the parking structure. Sandra was standing with her back to the window, wearing a coat she had not taken off, her hands pressed together in front of her. Amber was seated, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. They were at the far end of the corridor. Sandra saw me first. I watched it happen the moment her eyes found me, and moved from recognition of a white coat to recognition of a face, 8 years older than the last time she had seen it, in a hospital corridor in Cleveland wearing credentials she had not known existed. Her expression moved through several things in a very short window of time. Then she went completely still. Amber looked up when her mother stopped moving. She tracked her mother's gaze and found me at the end of the corridor. Her mouth opened. I walked toward them at the same pace I walk every floor of this hospital every day of my career. Measured, professional, unhurried. The pace of someone who knows what she is doing and where she is going and why. I stopped 3 feet from my mother. My mother spoke first. Her voice was barely holding together. Layla, she said my name, as though she was checking whether I was real. You're here. How are you? You're a doctor? I'm a cardiothoracic fellow at this hospital, I said. My voice was even, not cold. I want to be precise about that distinction, because I have thought about it many times since. Not performed detachment, not rehearsed composure, just professional. The voice I use when I need a family to receive information before they are ready to receive it. I have been here for 2 years. She stared at me. Behind her, Amber had stood up. She had one hand pressed flat to her sternum, as though she was steadying something inside herself. I pulled Dad's chart. I continued. His attending is Dr. Emmanuel Okafor. He is one of the most skilled interventional cardiologists currently practicing in this state. Your father? I corrected. Dad is going to receive excellent care. The procedure is well within standard practice for a blockage of this type, and his prognosis at this stage is favorable. My mother reached forward and took my arm. Her grip was firm in the way a frightened person grips something not to hold it, but to confirm it is solid. Is there any way you can be with him? Can you be in that room? Can you be his doctor, Layla? Her voice broke on my name. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. There is an ethics policy at this institution, and at every major hospital in this country, that prohibits physicians from treating immediate family members, I said. The policy exists for good reason. It protects both the physician and the patient from dynamics that compromise clinical judgment. I follow that policy. I will always follow that policy. A pause. Just a breath. But also no, Dad is not my patient. I watched my mother receive those words. I watched the professional reason move through her, the ethics policy, the institutional standard, and then I watched the second sentence arrive, and I watched her understand that the second sentence was doing something different than the first. The first sentence was information. The second sentence was truth. She began to process what those 4 words actually meant, and what they required her to understand about the last 8 years and why they had happened, and what her role in their happening had been. I watched it move through her face the way an understanding moves through a face when it is something that cannot be unfelt once it arrives. "You figured it out," she said. It was not a question. She was not saying it to me. She was saying it to herself, out loud, in the particular voice of someone who has just heard their own words played back in a register they can finally understand. "You said you'd figure it out, and you're here. You're a doctor. You figured it out." "I did," I said. "Exactly like you told me I would. There are moments in life that require no additional words. This was one of them." I could see in my mother's face the precise second she understood the full weight of what she had said 11 years ago at the kitchen table. Not just the decision she had made, the logic she had used to justify it, the way she had pointed to my strength as the reason she did not need to protect me, the way a compliment had been weaponized unconsciously, perhaps, but real in its effect into a permission slip. She sank. Not all at once, not a collapse, not a faint. The way a person sinks when what they have been holding becomes too heavy for the structure that has been supporting it. Her knees bent. She went down slowly, and I watched it happen, and I did not reach out to catch her. Amber caught her. Amber held her with both arms and looked at me over our mother's shoulder with an expression I had never seen on my sister's face before. Not guilt exactly, not grief exactly, something that looked like the beginning of a reckoning she had been avoiding for years and could no longer find a way around. I looked at them both. I looked at my mother, kneeling on the floor of a hospital corridor in Cleveland, held up by the daughter whose wedding had been built on money that was not hers to spend. I held that moment exactly as long as it needed to be held. Then I said, "The waiting area is on this floor, the room at the end of the corridor with the window. Someone from Dr. Okafor's team will update you every hour. If you have specific questions about the procedure, ask at the nursing station and they will connect you with his team." I paused. He is going to be taken care of. He will have everything he needs. Everything that this hospital can provide, he will receive. I turned and walked back down the corridor, past the nursing station, past the supply room, around the corner, and back toward the stairwell, back to my work, back to the life I had built in the 8 years they had spent, not thinking about what they had taken from me. I did not look back. I know what some of you are feeling right now. Some of you are thinking, was that too much? Was that cruel? I want to talk about that honestly, because I did not walk away from that corridor feeling victorious. I walked away feeling something much more complicated. Stay with me. This is the part people skip, and I am not going to skip it. I went to the break room on the 2nd floor. I poured a cup of coffee. I sat at the small table by the window, the one that faces the east parking structure and the slice of Lake Erie, visible on clear days between the buildings, and I did not drink the coffee. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall above the door. It did not feel like winning. I want to be very clear about that, because I think the version of this story where I walked away from that corridor with any sensation resembling triumph is not an honest version. What it felt like was complicated in the specific way that only family can make things complicated. My father was in this building, on a table, having a procedure done by people I trusted completely, and there was a part of me very small, but unmistakably present that was simply afraid. not about the outcome. Doctor, Okafor is among the best in his field, and I would refer my own life to his hands without hesitation. Afraid in the way you are afraid when you love someone, when you have always loved someone. Even across the distance of 8 years and $47,000 and a kitchen conversation that took 11 minutes and cost me the better part of a decade, I thought about my mother on the floor of that corridor. I did not feel satisfaction when I thought about it. I felt grief for the version of this family that could have existed. The version where the money stayed in the fund and I walked into medical school with my grandfather's faith financially intact, and my father's 3 winters of overtime honored the way they deserved to be honored. The version where my mother's compliments were offered without hidden machinery inside them. The version where I did not have to build alone in order to build it all. But here is what I also know. I did not leave my father without care. I ensured he was assigned to the best possible team in this building. I gave my mother factual, accurate, complete information about his prognosis and the procedure. I told her where to wait, told her how often they would receive updates, made sure she understood that every resource this institution could provide would be provided. I did not step aside and allow harm because I was hurt. That is not who I am. That is not what medicine is. What I did not give them was the emotional performance they had not earned. I did not collapse in the corridor. I did not absorb my mother's grief and carry it in addition to my own, the way I had spent 22 years absorbing the surplus emotion of a family that had consistently decided my feelings were the most negotiable thing in any situation. I did not perform forgiveness I had not arrived at. I did not pretend, in that corridor, that the last 8 years had a different shape than they did. The difference between mercy and complicity is something I have thought about for a long time. Mercy is making sure the people who hurt you receive adequate care when they need it. Mercy is being the professional you train to be, even in a hallway that makes that professionalism hard. Mercy is what I gave them in that corridor. Complicity is something else entirely. Complicity is pretending, in the moment that requires honesty, that the history did not happen. Complicity is performing warmth you do not have, in order to make other people comfortable with what they did to you. I was not going to be complicit anymore. I had stopped being complicit 11 years ago when I folded a grocery list in half and walked to my room. That decision still stood. The procedure went well. Dr. Okafor's team performed a successful intervention within the hour. My father's vitals stabilized, and by evening his indicators had moved into the range that suggests full recovery with appropriate follow-up care. I received that information the same way any fellow in this department receives it through the standard clinical channels. I did not return to the cardiac floor that day. 3 days into my father's recovery, a nurse mentioned to me at shift change that a patient on the cardiac floor had asked to speak with the doctor named Mercer. I told her I was not assigned to that patient's case. She nodded and made a note. That was the entire conversation. On the 4th day, Amber left a note at the nursing station. It was in a sealed envelope with my name on the front, not doctor. Mercer, just Layla, in my sister's handwriting. The same handwriting that had been on birthday cards and school notes throughout our shared childhood. Inside the envelope was a single paragraph, written on notepad paper from the hotel where she and my mother were staying. She wrote that she knew it was too late to fix what had happened. She wrote that she had found out 2 years after her wedding a cousin had mentioned it without realizing Amber did not already know, and that her first response had been to tell herself she had not known and therefore was not responsible. She wrote that she had spent 2 years understanding why that reasoning was insufficient. She wrote that she was not asking me to forgive her, that she understood forgiveness was not something she could request, that it was something I would either arrive at or not on my own terms. She said she was sorry it had taken this long to say what she had known for years, that she understood what they had done, and she should have called the moment she found out. I read the letter once. I folded it and put it in my coat pocket. I carried it home and left it on the kitchen table and made dinner and looked at it from across the room for the rest of the evening. It was not enough. Nothing written on hotel notepad paper 2 weeks after a hospital corridor encounter is enough for what 8 years of building alone cost. But it was something honest. And something honest after 8 years of nothing carries a different weight than the same something delivered under easier circumstances. My mother sent a letter. Handwritten. 4 pages, on personal stationery. She sent it to my work address, which means she had to find it, had to look up the department, had to address the envelope to me formally in a way that acknowledged the professional life I had constructed without her knowledge or involvement. I found it in my mailbox at the hospital between a clinical journal and a departmental meeting memo. I carried it to my car in the parking structure and I read it there, in the front seat, with the engine off. I will not share the whole letter. It belongs to her, not to this story. But there is one sentence in it that I have returned to more times than anything she has ever said to me in my living memory. I called your strength permission, and I know that now, and I am sorry it took me this long to understand what I was doing. That sentence is the first time my mother has ever said, in plain language, exactly what she did. Not, I'm sorry you were hurt, the apology that centers the speaker's discomfort at the other person's pain. Not, I'm sorry things worked out this way, the apology that treats a deliberate decision as though it was weather. She said what she did, and she named it accurately, and she said she was sorry. That is not nothing. It does not repair what was broken, but it is the first true brick of anything that might eventually be built between us. My father sent a photocopy. He is not a man who writes letters. His entire vocabulary of emotional expression has always lived in what he does, rather than what he says. And I have known this about him since I was old enough to notice patterns. What he sent was a photocopy of my grandfather's original note. He had kept it. The original in Earl Mercer's handwriting, the document my grandfather had written and notarized and placed in a fireproof box alongside the other things that mattered most. My father had kept it. All through the 8 years of my silence, through the estrangement, through whatever he had told himself about why things were the way they were, he had kept it. At the bottom of the photocopy in my father's handwriting, 3 words. He was right. 3 words. 11 years after the kitchen, my father's complete and entire vocabulary for apology, grief, and acknowledgement, compressed into the only sentence he could find. I read it in my locker room at the hospital before a shift. I stood there for a while. Then I put the photocopy next to my grandfather's copy, which I had carried for 11 years in the back of a notebook, and I closed the locker door and went to work. A month after the hospital, I called Amber. Not my mother, not yet, just Amber. The call lasted 22 minutes. We did not resolve everything. We did not even come close to everything. But we talked, and her voice on the other end of the line felt, for the first time in over a decade, like the voice of someone I could eventually trust again, rather than someone I was permanently protecting myself from. That distinction matters. It is the beginning of something. I am not going to rush what it becomes. My mother and I have spoken twice on the phone since the letter arrived. The conversations are slow and careful, 2 people feeling around the edges of something new, without an established map for what it is supposed to look like. I am not rushing toward reconciliation, and I am not committed to permanent distance. I am committed to honesty. If the relationship rebuilds, it will do so on honest ground. If it does not rebuild, I will have lived a full and extraordinary life anyway, and that is not a threat. It is simply a fact about who I have become. Amber and I talk more often. Last week, she called to tell me she had enrolled in a financial literacy course. Basic budgeting, saving structures, what it means to own something rather than to spend at the level you believe you should be spending. She said it in a self-deprecating way, the way people talk about things they are embarrassed to be learning late. I told her it was a good idea. She said, "You've been doing this forever, haven't you?" I said, "I had to." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know. I'm sorry it was because of me." I told her. I heard her. Then I changed the subject, because some things take more than one conversation to fully carry. I spent a long time being angry. I want to acknowledge that plainly, because people who tell stories of survival and rebuilding often skip it. They move from the injury directly to the triumph, and leave out the years in between where the anger is the only completely honest thing available to you. I was angry. In the anatomy lab at midnight, in the rideshare car on Tuesday nights when I had been awake for 19 hours, and a passenger asked me what I did for work, and I said receptionist because I was too tired to explain anything more on Christmases. On my birthday, in my second year of medical school, when the day passed without a single message from anyone in my family, I was angry. And the anger was real, and it was mine, and I do not apologize for it. And then, somewhere in the middle of residency, somewhere between a 12-hour shift and an exam I had prepared for on 3 hours of sleep, I noticed that the anger had become quieter. Not gone, just quieter. Underneath it, something else had been building for years without my conscious direction. Purpose. The specific, sustainable kind of purpose that comes not from having decided what you want, but from having built it from the materials available. Here's what I know now that I did not know at 22, sitting on a bedroom floor in Cincinnati. The people who take from you are often the people who believe most genuinely in your ability to survive the taking. That belief is not affection, it is not faith, though it is dressed in the language of faith. It is a decision to spend your resilience as though it belongs to them. They look at you and they see someone who will manage, who will rebuild, who will land on her feet, and they use that assessment as a budget as a reason to withdraw the protection they owe you and redirect it towards someone they have decided is less capable of managing without it. They call this faith in you. What it actually is the most convenient version of love, the version that requires nothing from them. Building alone is harder than building with people. I want to be completely honest about this, because I think there is a version of this story that gets told as a kind of triumph of individualism, as though the isolation was the point, as though building alone is inherently better than building with support. It is not. Building alone is harder. It is slower. It is more expensive, in money and time and sleep, and the specific loneliness of having no one to call when the calculation goes wrong at 2 a.m. It costs more than it should have cost. It took years off my margin. I carry that honestly. But here is the other side of it. When you build alone, every floor is completely yours. Every decision was yours. Every exam passed in exhaustion. Every scholarship essay written at a curbside desk. Every loan payment made on schedule. I know exactly who did that work. I cannot share the credit with anyone who did not earn it. My white coat has my name on it and only my name on it. And not because I am extraordinary, but because I showed up. I kept showing up. I made the next correct decision when there was no one to make it for me, or check it, or catch me if I got it wrong. My grandfather believed this family needed a doctor. He put $12,000 and a handwritten note behind that belief. He was right, though not in the way he might have imagined. This family did not need a doctor the way families sometimes display accomplished children. This family needed someone who understood that love is not enough if it is not also consistent. That pride in someone is not enough if it does not also mean protecting what is theirs. That telling someone they are capable is not love, it is description. Love is the part where you do not use their capability as a reason to take from them. Earl, my dog, not my grandfather, though the distinction feels less important to me than it once did, is asleep at the foot of my bed as I tell you this. He has one ear that stands up and one that doesn't. He does not require anything from me except consistency, food, walks, presence. He has never once looked at my capability and decided it was a reason to need less from me. I think that is the simplest and truest thing I have learned about what love is supposed to feel like. It is supposed to stay present. It is supposed to show up. It is supposed to not use what you are good at as an excuse to stop giving you what you need. My father is recovering well. He has changed his diet. He takes his medication every single day now, I know, because Amber sends me updates, and because something about a hospital corridor, apparently, has a clarifying effect on what was previously treated as optional. He goes to cardiac rehab twice a week. He called me once, a few weeks after discharge. The call was 4 minutes long. He said very little. At the end, before we hung up, he said, "I'm proud of you, Layla." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you, Dad." And we said goodbye. 4 minutes, 31 words, my father's language. I am learning to hear it. I just closed on my second property, a 2-bedroom condo near the hospital that I intend to rent. It is the first significant financial decision I have made in my life that felt genuinely easy. Not because the resources are suddenly limitless, but because I have been building toward this for long enough that arriving here felt like recognizing a destination I drew a map to 11 years ago, while standing in a kitchen holding a grocery list that had nothing to do with groceries. Anymore. I am 33 years old. I do not have a medical school fund. What I have instead is a cardiothoracic fellowship at one of the finest hospitals in the country, 2 properties, a zero balance on every debt I have ever carried, a dog named Earl, a friend named Devon who brought me soup before exams and cried when I called with good news, and a locker at this hospital with 2 pieces of paper in it, handwritten note from a man who believed in me when I was 9 years old, and a photocopy of that note with 3 words added in my father's handwriting. Together, those 2 pieces of paper say more about what I was worth and what was taken from me and what was eventually understood than anything that has ever been said out loud. And I have a life I built from the materials available, not the materials I was supposed to have, not the materials I was promised. The ones that were left after the taking, which turned out to be enough, more than enough, because the capability my mother told me I had was real. She was right about that. She was just wrong about what it obligated her to do. If you are the person in your family who is always told you will figure it out, if you are the one whose future is treated as flexible, whose strength is used as a budget, whose capability makes everyone else feel better about what they are taking from you, I am not going to promise you it will be easy. I am not going to tell you the anger does not last, or that the loneliness does not leave a mark, or that arriving at the other end of it does not cost more than it should have cost. What I am going to tell you is this: the building is real. Whatever you build in those years alone, without applause, without anyone logging your progress or celebrating your milestones, is genuinely, completely, irreversibly yours. No one can take a fellowship from you. No one can take a board score or a matched residency or a loan that has been paid off or a property whose deed has your name on it. The things you build with your own hands, from your own plans, with resources you generated yourself, belong to you in a way that nothing given can ever fully belong. And one day, if the shape of your story requires it, you may stand in a corridor somewhere and say the truest thing you have ever said, that you figured it out, exactly like they told you you would. And in that moment, all of it, every alarm at 4:45, every scholarship essay, every shift, every night you stayed in when you wanted to give up, every meal you skipped, every milestone you hit alone in a break room or a bathroom or the front seat of a car in a parking structure, all of it will have been in service of the person standing in that corridor, in the white coat, with the badge, with the name that your grandfather wrote down when you were 9 years old and he was dying and he wanted to make sure something he believed in would outlast him. He was right. You figured it out. That is more than enough. That is everything. I want to say one more thing about the hospital, about the specific moment I turned and walked back down the corridor, because I think people assume that moment was the end of something. And I want to be clear that it was the beginning. Not the beginning of forgiveness, which is a longer and more private process than any single corridor can contain. Not the beginning of reconciliation, which requires time and honesty and a willingness from all parties that I am not yet certain everyone has arrived at. The beginning of something simpler. The end of the silence that had protected me, and the start of a silence I was choosing consciously, on my own terms, because I had arrived at a place where choosing was something I could do. For 8 years, the estrangement had been a wall I built to keep things out. After the corridor, it became something different. A door I was choosing to open very slowly, 1 inch at a time, from my side, on my schedule, with full knowledge of what I was inviting back in and what conditions that invitation carried. That is a completely different kind of boundary. One is built from fear and necessity. The other is built from clarity. I had enough clarity now. I had earned it 1 4:45 alarm at a time. The thing that surprised me most, in the weeks after the hospital, was not my mother's letter, or my father's photocopy, or Amber's note on hotel stationery. It was how little I needed any of it to feel whole. I had expected somewhere in the back of a mind that I had spent 8 years training to be precise, that some kind of external validation would arrive with those words, that being acknowledged would fill in a gap I had been carrying since the kitchen. It did not. What I found was that the gap had already been filled, slowly and without fanfare, by the work, by the exam scores and the fellowship match, and the dog with the uneven ears, and the locker with 2 pieces of paper in it. The acknowledgement was meaningful, but it was not necessary. That is the part of building alone that no one tells you about. At some point, without your noticing, you stop needing anyone to confirm what you already know. I am going to keep showing up to this family in the way that is honest and sustainable for me. I am going to have dinners with my father that are sometimes good and sometimes quiet, and occasionally both. I am going to talk to Amber about financial literacy courses and crooked shelves and what it means to actually own something. I am going to write back to my mother's letters at a pace that feels truthful rather than performed. I am going to do all of this with the same precision I bring to everything else, attending to what is real, protecting what is mine, and refusing to pretend that anything is further along than it actually is. And every morning I am going to walk into this hospital and do the work that my grandfather believed I would do when he wrote a note and put $12,000 behind it. Every morning, I am going to be the doctor this family never had. Not for them, and not to prove something to anyone, but because it is what I was always going to be, and no kitchen conversation, no matter how much it cost me, or how long it took me to arrive here, was ever going to change that. The destination was fixed before I was old enough to understand what a destination was. My grandfather saw it, the work proved it, the white coat confirms it every single day. I want to leave you with something practical, because I think this story has enough emotion in it, and I want to balance it with something you can use. The most important financial decision I made in those 8 years was not the scholarships or the loan spreadsheet or the properties, though all of those mattered. The most important decision was the one I made on that bedroom floor, to stop spending energy trying to earn validation from people who had decided my worth was negotiable, and to redirect every unit of that energy into building something that did not require their opinion to be real. I was spending years trying to prove myself to an audience that had already written the script. The moment I stopped performing for that audience and started building for myself, everything changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but the direction changed. And direction is everything when you are working this hard. If you are in the middle of your own version of these 8 years, if you are the person in the break room at 2 a.m, the person in the car in the parking structure opening a banking app after a 12-hour shift, the person eating one real meal a day and running anatomy through your head while your hands do something else, I want you to know that the building is real. What you are making in the absence of support, in the absence of a fund and a safety net, and the ordinary infrastructure of family love, is real, and it is yours, and it will be there on the other side of this. Not as a trophy, not as proof of anything to anyone who doubted you. As a life. A full, specific, owned life that exists because you decided it would, and then you did the work, one 4:45 alarm at a time. My name is Layla Mercer. I am 33 years old. I figured it out, and from where I am standing now, in this life I built from the ground up with the materials that were left after the taking, I would not trade it, not for an easier route. Not for the version of this story where everything was handed to me at 22, and I arrived at the same place without knowing what I know now about my own capacity, about what I can build, about what belongs to me when no one else is keeping score. I know those things now with a certainty that cannot be given and cannot be taken. It has to be earned. I earned mine. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything I needed and everything I have, and it is completely, entirely, permanently mine. If this story reminded you of yourself, if you are the capable one, the one who always lands on their feet, the one the family counts on to manage the loss, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing is knowing someone else walked this road and came out on the other side, still standing, still building, still showing up. If you want more stories like this one, check the description below. I have linked a few that I think you will want to watch next. Subscribe and hit the bell. I read every single comment. I mean that, every one. And some of your stories are harder and braver and more costly than mine. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.